Jean Stapleton was television royalty, the heart and soul of All in the Family. Her portrayal of Edith Bunker was so tender and unforgettable that millions of Americans felt like they knew her. She brought kindness to chaos, warmth to controversy, and balance to Archie Bunker's bluster. And yet, when the cameras stopped rolling, John made a decision that stunned even those closest to her. She walked away, not just from the show, but from any chance of ever working with Carroll O'Connor again. At the time, no one understood it. They were television's most iconic couple. How could she just vanish from his life, professionally and personally? Jean Stapleton was offered guest spots, reunion episodes, and tributes, but she declined every single one. Publicly, she kept things graceful, saying she had moved on from the role, but there were whispers. People who had been on set saw the tension. They noticed the silences. Some said Jean never got the respect she deserved, while others believed something far more personal drove her decision. For decades, the real reason remained buried under layers of professional courtesy and Hollywood polish. But as time passed, the interviews, memoirs, and offhand comments started to reveal a deeper story, not just about Edith and Archie, but about Jean Stapleton and Carroll O'Connor. Two stars who made magic together but carried very different truths. When All in the Family premiered in 1971, it changed television forever. Gone were the sugar-coated sitcoms of the 1960s. In their place came something raw, loud, and unmistakably real. At the center of this cultural earthquake stood two characters: Archie Bunker, the opinionated, loud-mouthed everyman, and Edith Bunker, his sweet, soft-spoken wife, who somehow made everything feel okay. Carroll O'Connor was bold, confrontational, and unforgettable as Archie, but it was Jean Stapleton's Edith who gave the show its heart. Without her, Archie would have been unbearable. With her, he became human. Audiences laughed, cried, and sometimes winced at the couple's back and forth because, deep down, it felt familiar. It felt like home. Jean and Carroll's on-screen chemistry was electric. It wasn't just that they played well off one another. It was that they belonged to each other in the eyes of millions of viewers. They were believable in every way, which made what came later all the more shocking. They were not enemies, but they were not exactly close either. They were professionals, two actors with very different styles and temperaments. Carroll was known for being controlling, deeply involved in scripts and direction, while Jean was a quiet perfectionist, devoted to her craft, but often keeping her thoughts to herself. Still, they made it work. For 9 groundbreaking seasons, the show tackled racism, sexism, war, politics, and religion, topics no sitcom dared to touch before. Each time, Jean's portrayal of Edith anchored the audience. She was the soul of the series, softening Archie's harsh edges with her tenderness and humanity. When viewers laughed, it was often because of Archie. When they cried, it was almost always because of Edith. Emmy Awards rolled in. Jean won 3, Carroll 4, but despite the accolades, cracks were forming behind the curtain. Friends and insiders later said that Jean was never fully comfortable with the spotlight or the direction the show was heading. Yet in those early years, the tension remained hidden. Viewers only saw one of the greatest partnerships in television history, Edith and Archie, America's most dysfunctional yet beloved couple. Behind the laughter and applause, Jean was quietly keeping count and beginning to ask herself a question that would change everything. A question whose answer would set in motion a decision Carroll never saw coming. To millions of fans, Jean Stapleton was Edith Bunker. But to Jean herself, the role was never that simple. From the beginning, she knew the character was a caricature, meek, naive, and often the punchline in Archie's rants. Jean loved the show's message and believed in its power to spark conversations, but she struggled with how Edith was written. In many ways, Edith embodied everything Jean was not. In real life, Jean was intelligent, well-read, and quietly assertive. She had studied acting seriously, honed her craft on stage, and brought depth to every role she played. Yet on All in the Family, she often found herself portraying a character who was sweet, but submissive. Edith was loyal to Archie to a fault, rarely pushing back, even when he was cruel or demeaning. That dissonance began to wear on Jean. Over time, she tried to give Edith more dignity, subtle changes in tone, posture, and the way she responded to Archie's insults. Jean infused her with grace and wisdom, softening the scripts in ways the writers had not intended. Audiences noticed, and Carol did too. By the mid-1970s, Carol was not just the star. He was a force behind the scenes, rewriting scripts, challenging producers, and steering the show's tone. His instincts were sharp, but his control was firm. While he often claimed to support Jean, there were moments when she felt creatively boxed in. She was never one to complain publicly, but privately she confided in close friends. She had grown tired, not of acting, but of playing Edith. She wanted to evolve as an artist, to explore new roles that did not rely on her being quiet or doting, and yet Jean felt stuck. Every time she stepped out in public, people treated her like Edith. Strangers would call her a dingbat, unaware of how deeply that label stung. She began turning down press appearances and limited her involvement with storylines that made Edith look foolish. When the writers tried to give Edith more dramatic scenes, like her emotional breakdown during a harrowing episode involving trauma, Jean delivered with devastating authenticity. It was her way of showing the world that Edith was more than comic relief, more than a sidekick. But those moments were rare. The creative tension lingered, and so did Jean's doubts. She started asking herself if this was the legacy she truly wanted. Was she proud of what she had built? Absolutely. But could she keep doing it forever? She wasn't so sure. As these questions reached a breaking point, the show was approaching a major shift, one that would test Jean's patience and push her to the edge. Carol O'Connor was about to take even more control, and Jean had already started pulling away. By the mid-1970s, All in the Family was more than a hit. It was a cultural force. Carol was no longer just the star. He was becoming the engine of the show. What began as creative input soon turned into full-blown control. Writers, directors, and producers knew that if Carol didn't like something, it likely wouldn't air. At first, his leadership worked. He was sharp, passionate, and deeply invested. But his growing influence created tension, especially with Jean. While he pushed for bigger, louder moments, Jean valued subtlety and wanted to show Edith's emotional depth. He wanted Archie's scenes to hit hard. Jean, always professional, kept her frustrations private, but those close to the production noticed her silence during table reads and rehearsals. She would scan her script, offer few notes, and quietly comply. It wasn't defiance, but distance. Their working styles were simply incompatible. Carol was outspoken and forceful, Jean gentle and reserved, and as his dominance increased, her creative space shrank. The warmth between them never turned to hostility, but the connection that had driven the show began to fade. The tipping point came when Carol began laying the groundwork for a spin-off, Archie Bunker's Place. He wanted to carry on the legacy. Jean wanted to move on entirely. He pushed forward. She walked away, no arguments, no drama, just a firm, quiet decision that shocked everyone around them. The silence that followed said more than words ever could. When All in the Family ended its original run in 1979, fans were heartbroken, but many held out hope. Maybe Edith would return in the spin-off. Maybe there would be a special episode, a cameo, or a reunion down the line. After all, this was Edith Bunker. More than a character, she was family. But Jean Stapleton made one thing crystal clear. She was done. At the time, her explanation was simple. She had played the character for nearly a decade, felt Edith's story had been fully told, and wanted to pursue new opportunities. It sounded reasonable, even noble. As the years passed, cracks appeared in that narrative. Behind the scenes, insiders offered a different picture. Jean was emotionally drained, not just from the grind of weekly television, but from the slow, relentless erosion of creative freedom. She had grown weary of trying to shape a character, increasingly boxed in, trapped in a world she no longer believed in. And then there was Carol O'Connor. While Jean never publicly criticized him, quiet rumors of distance circulated. Not outright hostility, but an unspoken tension that deepened as the show went on. Some on set claimed Jean felt Carol's Personality had taken over not just the writing room, but the very soul of the show. What once felt like collaboration now felt like control. And Edith, once the show's quiet center, began to fade into the background. Jean reportedly disliked the direction the spin-off, Archie Bunker's Place, was heading. It lacked the original's spark and, more importantly, its heart. Without Edith, Archie was just Archie, and Jean had no interest in helping prop up a vision she no longer believed in. Even when producers offered her a farewell episode, a final on-screen goodbye, she declined. Eventually, the show explained Edith's absence with a line that stunned viewers. She had passed away off-screen between seasons. No tribute, no final moment, just gone. That decision came from Jean. She did not want to return, not even for closure. In her view, Edith was over, and whatever relationship she had with Carroll O'Connor was quietly but firmly closed as well. In interviews years later, Jean remained respectful and diplomatic. When asked directly about working with Carroll again, she dodged, pivoted, smiled, but never said yes. Some believed she was hurt. Others said she was simply ready to move on. In reality, it may have been something deeper, a private line she had drawn, one she would not cross again. Carroll O'Connor, for all his power and presence, could do nothing to change her mind. Carroll had always been outspoken. About politics, storytelling, or production decisions, he never held back. But when it came to Jean, he chose his words carefully. After she left All in the Family, he maintained a respectful, almost reverent tone when asked about her. He called her irreplaceable and praised her talents repeatedly. Yet behind the kind words lingered a quiet sense of loss, a regret that never quite faded. He had built Archie Bunker's Place to carry on the legacy of the original show, hoping to continue its success even without Jean. But the difference was obvious. The spin-off had its moments, and Carroll gave strong performances, but something was missing. The soul of the series, the gentle voice that had balanced Archie's bluster, was gone, and no one could fill that gap. Carroll knew it. Viewers knew it. Even critics who once hailed the original began noting the emotional hollowness in the new show. Without Edith, Archie's rants felt meaner, less charming. His vulnerability, once drawn out by Edith's compassion, now had nowhere to go. It became clear that Jean had not just played a supporting role, she had been the heart of the entire show. Over time, Carroll's public comments shifted subtly. He stopped speculating about a possible return, no longer suggested reunion specials, and when asked why Jean never came back, he offered a diplomatic answer. She had moved on. But those close to him said her absence weighed heavily. In private, Carroll reportedly confided that he missed her not just as a scene partner, but as a stabilizing force. On set, Jean had been calm, professional, and quietly powerful. She never raised her voice, but her presence grounded the chaos. Without her, the set was different, louder, less balanced. In a rare interview years later, Carroll admitted the show was never the same after Jean left, even calling her departure the end of an era. But he never explained why she really walked away or acknowledged that his own growing influence may have pushed her out. Whether he was unaware or unwilling to face it, we may never know. What is clear is that their relationship never returned to what it once was. They did not reunite for tributes, did not share the stage for nostalgic interviews. Two legends remained, forever linked on screen but quietly distanced off it. For Carroll, who had fought for creative control over everything else, this was one battle he could not win. Jean Stapleton had made her choice, and unlike so many of his television standoffs, he had no comeback. Jean was never one for scandal or the spotlight. Even as others cashed in on memoirs and tell-all interviews, she remained rooted in privacy and grace. Over the years, she gave just enough away to show that her decision to leave All in the Family and never work with Carroll O'Connor again was not made lightly. She granted a handful of interviews, never bashed Carroll, and never criticized the network, the writers, or the industry. But she also never hinted at any desire to return. Her words were measured, sometimes so careful they bordered on evasive, yet within those guarded responses were small, revealing moments. When asked if she missed the show, she would smile softly and say she was proud of the work. When pressed about Edith, she spoke about how she loved the character, but felt her journey was complete. What she never did was express any interest in revisiting that world, not for a tribute, not as a guest. She praised Carroll publicly, calling him a gifted actor and saying she was honored to work alongside him, but even those compliments were often followed by a gentle redirection. She would shift the conversation to theater, her work on television movies, or her love for Shakespeare. It was as if she had drawn a boundary around All in the Family and never allowed herself to cross it again. In one particularly telling interview, a journalist asked what made Edith so beloved. Jean replied, "Edith had empathy. She listened. She cared deeply. And I think people saw her heart." The interviewer followed up, asking if Jean saw herself the same way. She paused, then said, "Edith and I were very different. I am an actress. I do not live in that world." It was a simple answer, but a powerful one. She had spent years playing a woman defined by loyalty and submission, and now she was quietly reminding the world that she was her own person, one who made her own decisions, even when they shocked people. She turned down reunion specials, declined offers to revisit the show in documentaries or retrospectives, and even when All in the Family was honored at major award shows, Jean's presence was noticeably absent. Some assumed she was simply private. Others believed there was more to the story, and perhaps there was. You would. Jean Stapleton's story wasn't about drama or spectacle. It was about quiet courage. She understood that true legacy isn't measured by appearances or reunions, but by the integrity with which you live your choices. She gave the world Edith Bunker, a character who inspired empathy, laughter, and reflection, but she never allowed herself to be confined by that gift. In walking away, she set a standard few ever articulate so clearly, that there is power in defining your own path, in honoring your limits, and in valuing your creative and personal freedom above expectation. Fans may have wished for one last smile, one more cameo, or a reunion with Carroll O'Connor, but Jean never needed the world's applause to affirm her choice. She had said everything she could through Edith, and then she stepped forward into the life she wanted to lead on her own terms. Her departure, her refusal to return, and her unwavering commitment to privacy were not acts of spite, they were acts of principle. In the end, Jean Stapleton left behind more than a beloved character. She left a lesson in dignity, courage, and self-respect. That sometimes the greatest statements are made not by speaking, but by knowing when to walk away and never looking back.